Welcome to the Best Music Podcast, where we see behind the curtain and discover the hidden habits and success secrets of noteworthy music makers. My name is Dan Spencer, and this week's featured guest is Jann Klose.
'Cause even the darkest night has to end, and I surrender. Everybody, it's Jann Klose. And that's my new single, Surrender, which is out February 10th. Check it out. Even the darkest night.
Jann Klose is an award-winning pop singer-songwriter who has released 7 albums and 2 EPs. He's a recipient of 4, count them, 4 Independent Music Awards and a Grammy nomination. His recent singles, Sugar My, Flesh and Blood, Love You the Most, and Pilot Light have accumulated over 5 million streams across all platforms and charted on Top 40 radio in the US and South Africa. Jann is the singing voice of Tim Buckley in the movie Greetings from Tim Buckley, out on Universal, and his songs have been heard on the Grammy-nominated Healthy Food for Thought compilation, charted in the Billboard Top 10 compilation Action Moves People United, and the TV show MTV Cribs, as well as movies like Married Young on Amazon, Dead Broke, Warner Bros., and One Little Finger, alongside the world-famous Quincy Jones. He has performed as an actor and singer in touring companies of Broadway musicals, including Jesus Christ Superstar, Jekyll and Hyde, The Who's Tommy, as well as various TV, movies, voiceovers, and commercials. In 2020, Jann launched his podcast, Making Sound with Jann Klose. Recent episodes have featured industry legends like Mark Farner from Grand Funk Railroad, Frank Bello from Anthrax, and Simon Kirke from Bad Company. Jann tours year-round in North America, Europe, Africa, and Asia, and has opened and collaborated with a wide range of artists, including Pat Benatar, John Oates of Hall & Oates, Suzanne Vega, Renaissance's Annie Haslam, the Yardbirds and Jim McCarty, Rosanne Cash, Paula Cole, Brett Dennen, Karen Zoid, Shekhinah, the Byrds, Roger McGuinn, Rusted Root, Pete Seeger, and Les Paul. Jann Klose's 7th studio album, Surrender, will be released March 3rd, 2023, and you can check him out at jannklose.com. That's JANNKLOSE.com, at Facebook at Jann Klose, Instagram at Jann Klose, Twitter, Jann Klose Band, and YouTube, Jann Klose. Jann, thanks so much for taking the time to be with me here today.
Hey, Dan, how are you?
Man, I'm so stoked to talk with you because I got to say, I talked to your incredible publicist, and she sent over the single that's coming out for the new album, and I listened to it and I was like, oh my gosh, like real songwriting, real singing, like really just an incredible crafted piece of pop music that it appeals. Like, I played it for my girlfriend. She was like, oh, this is so great. And also for me as a trained musician, listening to it, so appreciating the level of craft, the level of detail, and the level of talent you are bringing here. And I'm so excited for this album to drop and to see where it goes, because I hear a rumor the entire album is all singles. So it's going to be a really strong offering. So I'm really stoked to see what happens.
Thank you very much.
So
flattery will get you everywhere, Tony.
Well, perhaps. Well, I don't even think of it as flattery. It's true, man. It's like, it's so strong. It's so strong. It's such a good song. And it's like, man, it's been a couple years since I've heard stuff like this come around, and not to compare you to anyone, because obviously you are unique, but just the level of the presentation of song first. Do you know what I mean? It's not production first, it's song first, and the production provides the canvas and the holding area and the hug for the song. Can you talk a little bit about that philosophy and how you go about creating such a high quality song first and foremost?
Yeah, thank you. I think the reason that I take that approach is because I feel the same way about songs. I want it to be about the song and the storytelling, and I do want it to sound great, but I need both. It's I think it has a lot to do with the people that I admire and the people I listen to growing up. And it was always about structure and song structure and ideas, creative ideas, ideas that are maybe a little different than what you've heard before. There is no, you can't really, everything's been done, right? Everything's been done, but how can you be clever about doing it again? How can you be clever about it? That's a word that David Bendeth, when I worked with David Bendeth, producer David Bendeth, he's most known for really a Paramore. That was he made, they had a huge hit with that, and Breaking Benjamin and other acts. And, he always, when I worked with him on my 2013 album Mosaic, he used that word all the time. He's like, how can we be clever about it? How can it be, how can we angle this, So the creative approach that we took then, and I learned a lot from that, and I do it now with Marcus Dembinski, who I'm working with now, who's my producer now, and who is also the music director in my band. He brought a whole new set and fresh set of ideas to the production elements that I loved, because they were different, because they weren't it wasn't what I did before. And I never want to repeat myself, because I'm already sort of slave to style and what I listened to growing up. And, some of that stuff just sticks with you and stays with you forever, you have to try and stay open and allow new ideas to come in to keep it fresh, So, it always starts with the song. And when it comes to the song, I have to give credit to Alex Forbes, who I wrote 6 out of the songs on the Surrender album with. And we have a writing session on Monday. I haven't seen her in a while, and I can't wait, because we have this wonderful connection, and it's like a therapy session writing with her. It's really great. We just push everything out and turn it into a song, and it's a lot of fun, and it's very cleansing. So yeah, it's about a lot of different things, making a record. It's not just one thing.
It's not one thing, but like you say, you start with a tremendous song, and that idea of that cleverness of let's do something that's a little, we've not heard this exact thing before. I'm specifically thinking of the chorus of Surrender is oh my gosh, the way you're writing those notes out and the phrasing and the placement, it's
Thank you.
Amazing. Well, absolutely dig it. And that's we can step out of the, like you say, it's it's pop, right? And there's certain constraints within that pop world where you sort of need to check certain boxes. Could you talk a little bit about being, like you say, slave to the genre and needing to stay within that sphere, but then be creative within that sphere?
Well, I mean, I don't mean slave to the genre. When I said that, I meant, you have sort of those really powerful influences when you're growing up. The first music you hear, for me, it was a lot of African music. It was a lot of American pop music, rock music, British rock music. So, I talk about how I really, some of the biggest influences on me are the folkies of the late 60s and, the rockers of the 70s, but also Motown. When I discovered Motown, everything changed. When I discovered the chess blues artists, everything changed again. When I discovered Led Zeppelin, when I discovered fusion, when I discovered Herbie Hancock, there were a lot of different things that played really big roles in my, musical shaping of my ideas. But at the core, there's always what you start with, what the first things you hear, and it's really melody and rhythm driven. And I know that sounds very general, but it, I love a great melody. I want a hook, I want to have something that I can latch onto and that makes me feel something. And pulls me in. You know, I don't want to have to work at it. You know, I just want to sit back and go, yeah. You know, that feels good. That sounds good. That speaks to me. That tells me something. That tells me something about the artist. It tells me something about myself. You know, when I have that kind of a reflection. And so when it comes to genre, you know, again, like today, any genre is everything is a genre. You know, like it's so fluid. You know, what's different now, I think, with younger listeners is they've become a little smarter. You know, they find the music on social media. You know, they find music through other avenues. And I mean, the labels constantly try to take advantage. The major labels constantly try to take advantage of this and try to push music or push, you know, something, a certain artist. It's usually about the artist, you know, not so much about the music itself. It's much more about, you know, image and that they try to push on the listener. So I feel like, you know, the job of someone like myself who really is songwriting centric is to use the song and then add the other elements, style, you know, like there are certain sounds that we're using on this record that I've never used before. You know, I'm using more synth sounds. You know, there's more programming on it. You know, I'm a big fan of Peter Gabriel. He changed my perspective on the combination of visual and audio, you know, and also production and sound. Like an early 2000s, I think 2002 album of Peter Gabriel called Up. You know, the sounds on that were so, and I'm looking forward. He has a new record coming out, and I'm like, yay! I'm releasing a new record the same year that Peter Gabriel is. Yay! You know, that feels good. You know, I mean, he doesn't release as much music as he used to, but every time he comes out with something, I'm like jonesing for it. You know? Like I want to know what he did and how he did it, and you know. So I'm very interested in the technical aspect of things. And with Marcus Dembinski, who I've worked with on this is my first time working with him. You know, and he's young, he's new, he's excited, and he's also really creative. And so I love the influence of new ideas into the songs, into the classic, more like classic pop driven songwriting that I'm doing with either by myself or with Alex Forbes. So him bringing in this influence that maybe you could consider style, to me is making it more interesting to work on the record. You know, if I get excited about it, I think I'm going to make a better album.
I think two things. Number one, when you say rhythm and melody is important, I don't think that's general. I think that's critical, because if you think of what it takes to make a hook and what it takes to make an effective melody, it is that combination of the actual notes, or we could call it the melody, and then the rhythm within which those notes are presented. Because you could take the same notes, give them a different rhythm, and all of a sudden it's not a hook. And then the inverse is also true. So I always think about melody as really having two distinct parts, and when those parts are brought together, then you truly have an effective melody.
And you're a songwriter as well?
A little bit here and there.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. What I would think about too is, and just to point this out for anyone who's listening to this conversation maybe doesn't know, that genre is a construct. It's not actually a real thing. It's something that the record labels invented so that they could say, all right, if you like this artist, then you'd also like this artist because it's this similar thing. And so genre has not always been. It's really just a way of, honestly, it's just a way of selling music. It was purely created to sell music. So just to point that out for anyone who doesn't happen to know.
And all the algorithms that are used now by, you know, like Spotify, YouTube, etc., you know, Apple Music, they tie into that kind of thinking.
Yeah, they also tie into, I don't know if I should be saying this, but they also tie into backdoor deals where major labels can go and actually get preferential treatment on the algorithms. But we'll maybe leave that for another day.
It's all paid for.
Yeah.
It is.
So,
true.
You know, you are now reaching this incredible level of getting play on top 40 radio, which for anyone who doesn't know is a huge achievement in and of itself, because you really need to be hooked into certain avenues. Certain people get access to these radios, and you also have to be of quality, and it has to be good that the people on those radio stations actually want to play it. Can you talk about what this has meant for you getting to top 40 and what you would recommend to other people who might want to achieve this same level of, we could call it success?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would recommend that you just keep working at it, just get better at the craft, because it is a craft and it takes time to develop. Labels used to develop artists, like a David Bowie, a Prince,
Madonna,
people like that. Well, Madonna was a little different. She had like a hit right out of the bag.
But she spent years in R&D. Like with the dancing and then the learning to sing and all that stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, like when you look at her early stuff, like early 80s stuff, and then when it comes to like a prayer, there is definitely there's definitely a nice, I mean, I like Madonna. In fact, I loved her when I was, when that stuff came out. Like I thought she was Borderline to me is still one of the a really good written, wonderfully written song. But I think that was who was that? Like Shep Pettibone and people like that when she was like starting out in the 80s. Anyway,
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
But yeah, no, we got off track. But look, development. Labels used to spend the time to develop an artist. Prince released, I don't know how many albums, 4 or 5 albums before Purple Rain came out. And Bowie was the same. It was like, I think Ziggy Stardust was his 5th or 6th album, right? I mean, you don't really get that anymore, but you still need to do it. It still needs to happen. We still need that kind of support and development. Artists still need that. So if you can't get it from a label or a management or someone that wants to just help you, you have to do it yourself. And if you can do that, if you can sustain that kind of energy and keep creating and getting better at it, then you'll have a career. And it's really, it sounds so simple, but it really is the perseverance. The talent has to be there, but you also have to develop the talent. So I always tell people, look, the only difference between me and that other guy or girl or whatever is that I just never stopped. I never gave up. I just kept going, and I'm going to keep going, because I love doing it. And believe me, there are many times when I thought, why am I still doing this? This is torture. It is. It's not an easy thing. It's not supposed to be easy. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. Wait, everyone is doing it. I mean, when you think about how much music gets pushed onto these platforms, I mean, I think that's part of the problem now, is that there's too much content being pushed onto the platforms, and the amount of content creates, it gets, it's too flooded at the moment. There aren't enough tastemakers, and when you go back to what you were saying about DJs and radio, look, yeah, it really depends on where you are. Like in South Africa, the reason I've had so much radio success there is because, yes, they like the music and so forth, and the songs were well written and well produced, and
Check.
all of that.
Check.
You have to have all of that, but there are still DJs there that make their choices. It's not the labels. The labels can, there are gatekeepers that have a power to get it in front of the DJ's ears, but they have more freedom there to decide what they want to play. Like it used to be in the US, but that all changed with the, when radio stations got bought out. It used to be you could own 7 radio stations as a conglomerate, as a corporation. Now there's no limit. You can buy as many radio stations as you want. And I think that really destroyed the the way that an independent artist got on the radio. But now it has to, again, it's still DJs. Again, I have to call out WFUV in New York. We got Surrendered played on that station. Yes, there was someone involved, a publicist that pitched the song, but there's also a DJ that goes, okay, I'm going to listen to this, and yeah, I like it, so I'm going to play it. And that, we need more of that. That's what's missing, I think. So I want to give credit to all of those creatives, because those are creative people too. They have to take the time to figure out, how is this going to fit in with everything else I'm playing, So
yeah, 100%. I think I would add two things to that. First is that while I agree that, like, we look at the music space and the podcast space and it's like flooded. But I think that the advantage of that is that if you actually, like you have done in your career, you wait for a long enough time horizon, and just by virtue of the fact that you've been there consistently, showing up, putting out songs, doing performances, going on tour, you actually start to, because everyone else is like, here for 5 minutes, gone, here for 5 minutes, gone, here for 5 minutes, gone, here for 5 minutes, gone. Sure, those stack up, but you actually end up getting exposure over time to so many more people when you really dedicate your life to it, and that's how you build success over the long run. What you've achieved some pretty incredible goals so far in music, which I would assume were goals at one point for you, that you now are here, and I'm sure you have things you're looking forward to doing still. And there's still there's always another. If you'll excuse the musical reference, there's you can climb another mountain and ford another stream. But
all right,
sound of music. Let's go. So, what would your number one piece of advice be for achieving goals for anyone out there listening?
Well, it depends on who you are. Everyone has different ways of getting there. For me, it's visualization. I use creative visualization.
Could you talk about that, please?
Sure. I have certain methods, and
It sounds like I'm on the phone with Liam Neeson. I have a special set of methods.
The Illuminati will be welcoming you to its sect. No, I don't do any of that. I imagine where I want to be. I really do. Like, I think about this. Sometimes it means I just go into sort of a meditative space, and for me that, I use running because I'm a runner. So I try to create a set of circumstances where I can be, basically induced by endorphins naturally, which is a lot of work, because you have to work at it to get that going. So it's like, for me, physical exercise, being outside, being in nature, no phones. I never take my phone with me. I leave it at home. So if I get robbed, then I'm on my own. No, I seriously, I really, I disconnect, I have to completely disconnect. And I need to be in an environment, and I need to be by myself. And I like being alone, like a lot of people are like, you like being alone? Why? What's wrong with you? Guess what? That's when I can be creative and I can reflect and I have time and I don't have anybody, asking me for a million things that they want me to do for them. I can really just focus on what I'm visualizing, what I want to achieve. And then I use some chants from Shakti Gawain. She has a book I think it's called Creative Visualization. And there are a lot of ideas in there how you can imagine this kind of thing. And that's what I've done. And I feel like those methods have created at least have created an environment for myself where I can put myself into a positive headspace, where I can keep dreaming, and imagining things that I want to do or want to achieve. And, I don't think you should ever stop doing that, but I think you need to put yourself in a place where you're not distracted. And I think that is probably the biggest enemy is distraction.
Yeah, being able to be good friends with yourself and being able to
Definitely.
just to be able to like
Definitely.
love yourself and be able to sit in a room by yourself and be okay with yourself, I think is a huge thing. And I'm so happy for you that you have that as part of
Thank
your
you.
life.
It took a few years. I
one
had to
human
work
being
at
to
it.
another. I'm really happy for you.
Thank you.
A question for you, because I think this is really critical for achieving goals. You mentioned the positive mind space and the positive mindset. And this isn't and for anyone listening, I'm not talking about some woo-woo thing where it's this ephemeral thing where, like you say, you've got to like, do like sacrifices under the moonlight. It's like nothing like that. Nope. But it's you're not trying to gain some like,
not for me.
You're not trying to gain some supernatural advantage over the next person or even with yourself, because you should only ever be in contest with yourself, in my opinion. But can you talk a little bit about finding that positive headspace and that relationship with yourself to get to that point, and then the results of creative outputs from that state?
Yeah, look, years of work, working on yourself, working on myself. It really, I think saying no is very difficult to do for a lot of artists and a lot of people in general. Saying no, I don't want that. I don't need that. Even though, there's so much gaslighting, I think, in society. You know what I mean by gaslighting?
Well, I understand what gaslighting is, but tell me what you mean.
Yeah, there's so much. I think as artists, we tend to be very sensitive people, right? So we seek attention, and it's natural to do so because it's part of the process, and I certainly do that. I want to be seen, and I want to be heard, right? That's part of the reason I do the work. But for me, it's important to also create a certain amount of space where I have to make choices about how I'm spending my energy, because if I don't, it's going to be gone. It'll go away, and I won't have that energy to create. And I love, more than anything, creating something out of nothing, or the influences I've had in my head already, the sounds and the artist, the dancing, the music, the visuals. There's so much, right? There's so much that can inspire, and that inspires me. But I have to have that space. So that means I have to have ways of saying no, and you can do it in a nice way. You can say, look, that is too much on my plate. It's a lot like food. Think of it that way.
Go on.
Look how much food we put in our bodies in the Western world. We're so used to having access to all of this stuff. And I try to not put anything in my body where I, A, don't know what's in it, and B, I need to make sure that my body can process it, right? Because whatever you put in your body has to come out. Okay, at some point.
I have no idea what you're talking about, but okay, go on.
Yeah, it's called, eating. Anyway, so a lot of it is to me is really about how much do you put on your proverbial plate. Can you digest it? Can you chew it? Can you swallow it? I'm sorry, it sounds very graphic, but it really is like, to me, it's culturally, it's fascinating. Because, I grew up, my grandparents raised me and my brother, and they lived through a war. So they knew what it was like not to have anything, no food. So food for them was rather a special thing. And not to get too off track for what we're talking about, but I was very lucky in a sense, because we were raised with eating, healthily, food was something special, So I use that analogy a lot because I think that it's very difficult to say no, and you need discipline, and I think that's something that artists kind of have to learn. If you didn't learn it growing up, it's very important. So I think that's my answer. Say no, thank you.
100%.
No thanks.
I totally agree. And to continue the analogy, like you say, if you're putting something in your body that you don't know what's in it, I think it's the same thing. It's like, we could equate dealing with someone in your life who maybe has like a chaotic or toxic energy or ways of doing things that's going to suck your time, that's going to take your creative juice, that's going to take your focus away. It's like eating a bunch of candy where all of a sudden, like, it might be really exciting for a minute to have this energy in your life, but after you're done, you're like, oh my goodness, like I cannot do that every day. And I think as soon as people start to think in that way, it's like your life opens up. It also becomes more quiet and more centered and more simple. But back to the music, Jann.
Very useful.
I think so too. What's your number one piece of advice you have for practicing? Because you're a tremendous vocalist. You also play guitar. From what I could see, you're very good at the rhythm guitar thing. Like, really solid player. Talk to me about practice.
Yeah, well, I'm embarrassed to say that I don't really practice.
Okay, but was there a point of time in your life where you were like 8 hours a day?
Never 8 hours a day. So I don't know if I'm the right person to ask about that, but I really, for me, I hate rehearsals. I really do. I hate rehearsals. I just want to play the show. But I know that rehearsals are important and you have to work through the music, and so I do them grudgingly. But I hate rehearsing and I hate practicing.
Okay.
So I'm afraid but it's the truth,
Yes.
But I think I sing just about every day because I'm lucky because I carry the instrument with me, and I always hum something, and I work with singers, I coach voice, I have like a few private students I work with, I produce, between that, writing sessions and live performances, and yes, I have to rehearse for the performances with the band. When there's a band, you have to rehearse. Again, it's not my favorite thing to do, but it has to happen. Between all of that, there's enough playing and enough singing going on a day-to-day basis in my schedule that kind of keeps me, on my toes, so to speak.
Perhaps a better question would be, how did you get to the point of technical and fundamental proficiency as a vocalist? I think it perhaps is a better question.
Well, I will say that I studied voice for 2 years. I worked with some really great teachers, and I try to pass that information on to my students now. But I also want to keep learning, So it's a mix of listening. Like when I listen, I can't have background music on. It's very difficult for me. I don't like going to restaurants or bars where the music is playing so loudly that I have to, I'm already paying attention to it because it's already there. So I tend to I'm a focused listener. When I listen to something, I make the time for it. I organize my time so that I can listen to it. And I have to, because there is only so many hours in the day. But listening is really, really important still. But when I worked with coaches, David Gooding, and when I studied in Cleveland, Ohio, Claudia Catania, when I studied in New York, when I first came to New York, these were great artists in their own right, and I wanted to know everything that they knew, and I still do. I still, when I listen to singers, especially when it comes to singers that are, now I'm not so interested in in pop singers, or though some of them, you know, like it just, I like listening to great voices that are colorful and have a unique quality. I like listening to singers that enunciate well, where I can hear the words they're saying, so I can hear the message, you know. A lot of it is about sound now, and there's so much melodyne and auto-tuning. And I think when you use that creatively, it can be wonderful, right? Like, I mean, like Daft Punk and like Giorgio Moroder and like, you know, I mean, like it goes way back, you know, like that kind of stuff is amazing to me, but they used it in a very creative space. Whereas a lot of melodyne and auto-tuning now is just done as it's too gimmicky for me. It's overused. But yeah, I think I keep trying to listen, and I had some great teachers that I worked with, so I was in the right place at the right time with them.
Picking back up on one thing you said, I think I'd like to break that down for people who maybe don't understand, is the autotune and the tone. Mm-hmm. Because what happens is when a voice gets autotuned is you actually lose a lot of the unique characteristics of the voice. In fact, I was out for dinner a couple nights ago.
I have so much to say about this.
Yes, okay, beautiful. And I'm sitting there and I'm hearing this song, and the singer sounds familiar. And my girlfriend, she's always up on pop. Like she knows all the top 40. Like she loves pop music. And so I go, who is this? She goes, it's Ed Sheeran. I go, no, it isn't. And I listen. I'm like, oh my goodness, it is Ed Sheeran. But I legitimately did not recognize him because he's such a fantastic singer. Mm-hmm. Like rarely on his records is there heavy-handed autotune to the point where it actually sounds autotune. You get this, like, for anyone who doesn't know, it's like this sort of brittle, sharp, crispy sound in the voice that happens. Mm-hmm. And it just blew my mind. I was like, oh my gosh. It's just the complete masking of the unique characteristics of the voice. But Jann, you say you have some things to say about autotune. Please go ahead. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Going back to what I said earlier, I think if it's used creatively for sound, it can really be cool. You know, I mean, it really depends on how you use it. I think for me as a singer and as a recording artist, it all starts with the microphone. Okay, so it's what do you begin with so that you can turn it into whatever else you want to turn it into. So for me, that's always been, since I landed on a Neumann, on an 87.
Oh, well,
most of my vocals that I do are on Neumann microphones. All the vocals you're hearing on, except a couple, you know, where we switch things out a little bit for you know, to just to create some different tonality and different color. But most of the vocals on all my albums are recorded on Neumanns, except for on In Tandem we used a Sony. But I think it starts with the microphone, and then you have the ability to say, well, I want to change the color and the feel and the tone of this vocal. So then the question is, why? Why do you want to change it? Because you can, or because you want to, for a specific reason. Like, we have a track on the album, it's going to be a single, and hopefully a video too, called Do You Want to Be Lonely? And we used some vocal effects on it because it fit the song. We felt, Marcus Dembinski, my producer and a music director, and I felt that it fit the song. So we used it, you know, but there are others, like in Surrender, it's just a straight ahead rock vocal, you know. There's some compression on it, you know, some verb and some delay, but that's it. And, you know, a little EQing, but you don't really, if you have a really good mic and you're a decent singer and you know how to use a mic in the recording studio, and live is a whole other thing, it's a whole other conversation, then you can create something, you know.
Jann, can you talk a little bit about preamps? And this is getting a little audio nerdy here.
Sure.
But oftentimes, the mic goes into something before it goes into the actual thing you're recording, and obviously, it's not always the case. But a preamp oftentimes has tubes and all sorts of things where you add even more texture and quality. Is there a particular preamp combo you like using with that U87?
Not particular, but I mean, it really depends. There's so many mics now that are actually decently priced that sound great. So there is all that. The technology has evolved. Everyone can have a setup at home, and it really depends on what you like. So much is about taste, So for me, I kind of tend to go for the classic route. I like Apollo preamps; they sound great. Like Neve tube preamps sound great. We recorded in tandem my last studio album on an SSL, so it's more of a rock board, but I'm kind of in that field, so it worked. But you can do so much now just with your computer and at home, and with plugins. The plugins have gotten so good. The samples have gotten so good because the resolution is so high and computing power is so good. So again, I think it depends on your personal taste. The way I would do it is go after an artist that you like, whose sound you like, and find out what they're using. And then look if you can afford that. And if you can't, see what's close to it.
Or go to a studio where they have it.
Or go to a studio where they have everything. Like we recorded most of Surrender at Studio G in Brooklyn. And they have everything there. So we can say we want to do this, we want to use this, we want to use that. So, yeah. But we did some of it at home. Like we recorded one of the vocals on the album, two of them. One of them right here in this apartment, not on this microphone. It's a different mic. And this is, my home studio. And then one at David Schoenwetter's home studio in Manhattan. And then all the demoing and all the basic guitar tracks, which we redid at the studio. Because during the pandemic, we couldn't even go to a studio. So we're like, well, how are we going to do this? Well, come over and we'll do it here. And so that's what we did until we were able to. And then we started adding, real instruments and, added the drums and added bass and re-recorded the acoustic guitars, re-recorded the vocals, but we already had really good structure of the basic tracks in place already in the arrangements.
Jann, what's your number one piece of advice for people who are learning how to write songs or already know how to write songs? What's a guiding principle for writing better songs?
Easy. Write about what you know. Write about what you know. Unless you're very, very, very creative. If you're Oscar Wilde, then make it up. But if you're not Oscar Wilde, or, I don't know, a lot of other people, just write about what you know. Write about what's happened to you. Write about how you view the world, and be really honest about it. And then you'll get your audience. You'll get your audience.
What are your thoughts on inspiration? Because obviously it's never a linear process, but I'm sure that over all the songs you've written and crafted, and the reason why I'm using crafted is because you didn't just write songs, you went in and you created, you went in, you nuts and bolts, you turned them into, these incredible pieces of art with such effective songwriting.
Thank you.
Can you talk about, it's this question that always comes, is is it lyrics, melody, or chords that happen first, right? Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about, just in terms of your internal prioritization in general, because obviously there's going to be times where you get an idea for a melody, obviously there's times when you get an idea for lyrics, the general flow that you've found that you like the most for creating songs?
The general flow, yeah, it really, it's different from person to person. So, I mean, when I used to write by myself, and I still write by myself, but, you know, I do a lot of co-writing now because I like collaboration, and collaboration really gave me success too, I have to say. So, more success, you know, and I do love working with others, and I didn't used to. I wasn't always that open and fearless, you know, because you have to be kind of fearless to let go of the idea that you're having, and you just have to. It is about surrendering, you know, like, not to, you know, to quote myself, but you have to surrender to something or someone, and that's really at the core of the meaning of the record too, because we all think we have control. Like, you know, we want control. We want to feel like we have a handle on everything. It makes us feel safe. It creates this illusion of safety, which we don't really have, period. You know, just look at the world around you, you know. It's an illusion. But we seek it out. Like, we look for control and safety and but the opposite is actually true. When you let go of that, you know, or when you surrender to, when you surrender the fear, right? When you let that go, when you like get rid of it, that's when the good things happen. That's when, you know, miracles happen, because you don't know how it's going to go. Like, you don't have that knowledge, and it, you know. I think that's a big mistake that a lot of people make. I've made it. I've made that mistake, you know, where I've thought, oh, no, wait, I know how to do this. I know how to handle this situation, and you don't, you know, or they don't, or so forth. And I think when I've done the opposite, when I've said, you know what do you think? What do you think? And I already have a strong idea, right? I already have a very strong idea, and sometimes it works really well, and sometimes it doesn't. And so I think it really is about relinquishing that fear and walking away from it and just saying, just let it happen as it's supposed to, and listening, a lot of listening.
I have one more question for you for today, Jann.
Yeah. How
do you define success in your music career?
Great question. It's hard to answer, because again, it's different for everybody.
For you,
it depends on where you set the bar, right? So, if I feel like, there are people listening to my music, and I don't know who they are, that feels like success. So, you know, you kind of know, and I know that because they find me, and then I hear from them, and, you know, I'm relatively easy to find if you know how to spell my name.
That's JANNKLOSE.
So yes, I would say it's such a tough question. I think if you do what you love, like I do what I love, and I get to do it whenever I want. So that to me is success. Being able to say no, learning to say no is success. Should leave it at that, because it's going to get complicated.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Jann Klose's 7th album, Surrender, is going to be released on March 3rd. I count myself now among the lucky few that not only have heard it, but actually also have met Jann Klose. So perhaps you are 0.00001% less successful by your own definition, because you've now met one more person Oh, no. You were the one who's more successful because you met one person. Excuse me.
Yes.
I figured it out. Everyone, check out JannKlose.com. That's JannKlose.com. Spelled the same on Facebook and the same on Instagram. On Twitter, Jann Klose Band. And on YouTube, Jann Klose. Jann, thank you so much for taking the time to come hang out with me, share your knowledge, your insight, your thoughts, your philosophy. This has been huge, and I'm so stoked for what is most assuredly going to be a hugely successful album. So I'm so stoked for you.
Thank you, Dan Spencer. It was great to be on your show. You got to come on mine.